The special study session for September 8th, 2020 is called to order, and our first presentation is by the Citizens Advisory Budget Committee. Please proceed.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor and City Council. It is our great privilege to be with you today. With me are my Vice Chair, Michael Westerberg, my Secretary, John L. Scott, and three of our subcommittee chairs. And so they'll introduce themselves once I call upon them. As I shared in
the point of order, are we supposed to, we don't need to do a roll call for council?
No, I checked with staff and they said no roll call because it's only a study session.
Sorry,
yeah. No, that's fine. Please proceed.
All good. As I shared in my letter to you, our primary focus was to center the shared budget priorities of our appointing council members. COVID presented, as you know, an opportunity to demonstrate our agility and flexibility as we move forward in our work, which included our review of the 2021 budget. Next slide. Thank you. We formed three subcommittees listed to meet that need. Those chairs will speak this afternoon on their work product and their recommendations. Although they will highlight a few details shortly, most of the data that they will share with you is contained in the report included in your packet. And of course, we are available to answer any questions you may have following our presentation. Next slide, please. Staff led the CABC through the same one-on-one packet that you all received, and their recommendations, as always, were highly regarded. I am pleased to share that we recommend approval of the city manager's budget as presented. Next slide, please. First up is Brian Matisse, who chaired our projections subcommittee. Brian, if you could share a little bit about your work and recommendations.
Thank you, Leanne. I'd also like to thank the members of the projections subcommittee for their work on this effort, as set forth on this slide. Jeff Brown, Reno Carollo, Julie Marie Shepard, Craig Upston, Michael Westerberg, and Dustin Zvanek. The subcommittee was tasked with critically reviewing the tax revenue projections of the University of Colorado Lead School of Business that were presented to the city in April of 2020. These April 2020 projections covered sales tax, building materials tax, auto use tax, other use tax, and property taxes. The complete report of the subcommittee with all of the detail is found in appendix pages H9 through H15 of the 2021 proposed budget. Now, initially, the council and the mayor, you need to understand that the subcommittee wants to emphasize the lack of visibility this year in particular as to the future economic conditions due to the unprecedented nature of the pandemic. Depending on the medical progress with vaccines and treatment, the severity of any future outbreaks, and most importantly, the psychological response of the public, the economic activity may or may not return quickly to pre-pandemic level. The LEADS report also contained three scenarios: optimistic, baseline, and pessimistic. The subcommittee recommended using the baseline scenario, which projected a 3.4% decrease in total tax revenue from 2019 through 2021. And importantly, also, using the most current LEADS baseline material is critical because there were two subsequent modifications of the LEADS report. There was a May 2020 and June 2020 projections, which showed much more pessimistic numbers. For example, the May numbers showed a 12% decline in tax revenue, whereas the June model came back up again to show only a 4.8% decline. Next slide. The subcommittee initially met in May, and it found that the LEADS baseline report at that time seemed to be too optimistic because it failed to capture a few of the decline in business revenues from taxes. We looked at the Legislative Counsel Service report for the state of Colorado, which informed the state's 2020-2021 budget. as well as the preliminary auto sales reports, both of which were more pessimistic than the leads projections. Notably, the projections subcommittee did not take into account any federal stimulus aid to local governments to offset revenue shortfalls, as that continues even to this day to be debated in Congress, and whether or not there will be any stimulus funds to offset revenue shortfalls is still unknown. Next slide. Initially, in May of 2020, the subcommittee recommended that sales tax projections be reduced by approximately 5% from the leads model, and auto use tax a decline of 10%, partially offset by an increase in property tax. However, we continued to review actual sales tax numbers that came in, and fortunately, the June and July sales tax revenues have been tracking significantly higher than both the leads projections and the subcommittee's projections. In addition, they're tracking from a higher base as we finished 2019 and began the first 2 months of 2020 with much better sales tax revenues than were projected in the 2020 budget. Accordingly, the subcommittee's final conclusion in August was that the leads 2020 baseline scenario that is used in the 2021 draft budget is within the range of uncertainty and appears reasonable, and we recommend using it. However, we want to warn you that there is a much greater risk in 2021 of a mid-year budget adjustments, either positive or negative, that's typical in prior years. Turn it over now to the Revenue Subcommittee.
Well, thank you, Brian. I appreciate you. Reno Carollo chaired our Revenue Subcommittee. Reno, please.
Great. Thank you, Leanne. City Council and Mayor Kaufman, I want to thank all of the individuals who helped work on this subcommittee revenue report. One of the things that we found, if you go to the next slide, please, was that the key observations we were looking for in what the city was doing, the 4 categories that we were doing, we consider and think that that's a really good thing for the city to continue to pursue. Besides holding bake sales or car washes as our main source of revenue, we found a couple of other things that we think are really important to take a look at. Our committee found that we need to protect our retail tax base by developing a retail, entertainment, and dining strategy, either by creating a task force or a group of people who would be charged with the task to get this accomplished. Our current retail tax base falls about 14% short below the average of our peers in this metro area. This was a Gonzalez report, and we could have, had we been performing just average, added another $28 million to our revenue. Our conclusions, next slide, please. The Gonzalez report on the right side of your screen there. Our conclusions are that we need to create a task force to develop and figure out how to raise our performance. We also need to develop a multi-purpose complex that would help in our generating revenue for our city, either owned by the city or in public-private partnership with the city. Besides that, we have come up with we looked at the potential of generating $1 to $2 million for services that our city already provides, and we put that in a minority report because Chief Williams had her hands full, and we got the information fairly late. So I highly recommend that you take a look at that. And that would be the conclusion of our report. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Reno. Appreciate you. Finally, Dustin Zavanek chaired our spending subcommittee. Dustin, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, members of council. And again, I want to thank all of the members of the spending subcommittee for the time and work that you put into this. Our subcommittee, the primary objective was really to offer a citizen's point of view on the potential general fund program reductions and the types of cuts that could be considered following the unexpected downturn earlier this year. The process that we worked through to provide this point of view started off with a review of each of the general fund programs and placing them into one of 3 tiers. We followed that same process, prioritizing where the cuts could come from. Next slide, please. On this slide, you'll see that we have the 3 tiers. The first tier being the programs and the types of cuts that we believe ought to be considered first when looking at ways to reduce the budget. The second tier being second option for general fund reductions and types of cuts. And of course, the third tier being the last place or the programs and types of cuts that we'd like to avoid or be, at very least, be limited to the greatest extent possible. Each member of the spending subcommittee went through this process and submitted individual recommendations. In the final product report that we submitted to each of you, the report shows a comprehensive cumulative point of view that was generated by taking those individual responses and averaging them. This was done for both the general fund reduction as well as where the cuts would come from. Initially, as we started to work through this process, we had hoped to take our recommendations and compare them with the department heads and have some time to sit down and talk through their recommendations. At the same time, we were working through it. But given the limited time that we had after the shutdown, we didn't have the opportunity to sit down with each and every one of them to see how their prioritization process aligned with ours. What we were able to do, however, with the help of city staff, was to create a side-by-side comparison of the bottom-up recommendations that were made by the departments and the cumulative point of view that was provided by our subcommittee and ultimately approved by the entire CABC as a whole. What this allowed us to do is really check for any significant variances between the recommendations made by the Citizens Advisory Budget Committee and that made by staff. Ultimately, there were very limited variances between the two. As an advisory committee, we did not see the opportunity to give very specific recommendations for specific cuts, given our limited time and the inability to meet with the departments the way that we had hoped we could. However, we wanted to put together a report that would provide input that would reflect a point of view from the citizens that could be compared to the recommendations made by city staff that all of you could consider as you finalize the budget and determine the cuts that are ultimately going to be needed to be made in order to close the budget gap faced by our city. Thanks, Leanne.
Thank you, Dustin. I appreciate you. And thank you to all the subcommittee chairs. This CABC has done a fabulous job in producing this work product. And so I want to thank each of you for your leadership on your respective subcommittees in this season. So we are expectant that our recommendations will support the budgetary decision-making that lies ahead for council, for the mayor and city manager. And so with that, what questions can we answer for you as it relates to our work?
Questions?
I have some.
Councilmember Bergen.
Yes, well, first I want to say thank you to the CABC committee. I'm very fond of this committee as I served on it for just over 4 years and chaired it as well. So thank you all. I know you put in a lot of work to provide us with recommendations. So first, just on the revenue subcommittee with the Performing Arts Center, which I know we are very much lacking in the city of Aurora.
Sure.
I think there was some thoughts of not just one venue, but multiple venues. So could, I don't know who, if it's Reno that would expound on that, but just what your thoughts were, obviously with the revenue cuts that we're having to make right now, it makes it difficult to look at something that would be a big capital cost to the city.
Sure.
Can you talk about maybe just the in between and maybe the various venues?
Happy to, and then I'll certainly defer to Reno. So the discussion around a scattered site venue opportunity here in Aurora, specifically where we have buildings that aren't being utilized at the moment. The idea was to repurpose those buildings versus making a request or suggesting a capital investment for new construction. Reno, did you want to add to that?
Sure, thank you. Francois, one of the things we did last year in your 2020 budget, Section H of the CABC report, we gave you 12 possible ideas. Right. We also gave you one that you can afford right now with your lodger's tax for a small venue that I think I pointed out to you last year was the canvas covered. They have one exactly like it at Conservatory Green in Stapleton. We looked at the potential of what kind of property does the city have or own right now so that we won't have land costs. That might be another way to be able to cut some costs. We think that one of the things that's really important right now in COVID might be an ideal time if we're not having to raise tons of capital, like $30, $40 million. But if we can do something where we can design this so that it can accommodate COVID and then can accommodate get back to normal later, that might be a great time for us to really consider looking at this. Now, we think that revenue generated by this will help attract people, and I have always been a proponent, and I believe that we are losing too much money by our citizens going to Denver, Arvada, Castle Rock, Lone Tree, Parker, and we're losing a lot of money. 5 years ago, I asked to form a task force to see if what we could put a number to that. So I do strongly and firmly believe that we can do this. So if you look at, to answer your question, if you look at last year's budget, using the lodger's tax and Visit Aurora, you will see that we can afford a unit right now without changing much in terms of our budget. Does that answer your question, I hope?
It does, yes, that helps a lot. So I appreciate that. Then my only other question on the revenue, did you guys look at Sports Park 2 as a potential revenue source?
Reno?
We thought that definitely what we would like to do was maybe a combination. In 2017, we presented council, Dave Gruber and I presented council with a potential arts and athletics complex. We're trying to come up with all kinds of possibilities to where we could do Sports Park 2. We could get some personal or some investment from hotels, et cetera, in the area. If we had a multi-purpose plex where we could host graduations for both Aurora schools and Cherry Creek schools, the city would greatly benefit, and this would increase our tax base. Plus, this task force that we're proposing, I think, has to do an incredible job of how do we attract big business here? How do we attract smaller businesses here? How can we put a focus on really being the city that we possibly can grow into because of our space and our size and all the benefits that we have to offer? If we are expanding out northeast and there's going to be lots of homes, we as a city do not make tons of money off of our homes. Plus, we're responsible for the roads and the infrastructure. And I just would hate to see us get behind on that. So if we don't have equalizing retail, dining, and entertainment, we're going to be in trouble.
Thank you, Reno. Reno, you've been paying attention over all these years.
Well, we're trying to work with you guys, okay?
Thank you. And then my other question is on the spending committee. So, yeah, I mean, you provided a lot of backup with the different departments and so forth. So with the 3 tiers, then the thought was that looking at what is prioritizing, I guess, basically where the cuts would be based on what is a priority city service versus something a little bit lower on that tier. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. Go ahead, Leanne. Do you want to say something?
No, you're all set, Dustin. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that was right. So the way that we approached it was to have, like I said, each member of the committee look at it and prioritize it based on that criteria, and reach out to their appointing members to get some input. Which of these programs would you want? So tier 1 being which ones would you want to be first to be cut if there had to be cuts, second and third. The idea being that just to show an overview of prioritization, we went through the entire spreadsheet. There was a number of general programs included, so that process took us some time. But then the idea was then to be able to compare that to the bottom-up recommendations that you all received from the departments. That spreadsheet does exist. It's not included in the final report, but we had put that together along with Greg and his team that kind of shows where the department's recommendations came in relative to ours. And what we were really looking for at that point was just where there were large variances. And as I mentioned, there weren't any. We would have liked to dug into a little deeper on some of the specifics, but as you can imagine, when we met in March, actually, I guess it would have been February last time we met, we had different subcommittees. And then the subcommittees were reworked, and we were working through at the same time the city was doing an enormous amount of work trying to go through their own prioritization process. So in order to give you something to work with, we wanted to give you that overview of a point of view from the citizens.
And I'll just add to that. Thank you, Dustin. I'll just add to that. We did, in fact, work. That was the task, was to go back to our appointing council members and identify what your budgetary priorities were for the year. And unfortunately, we had to do the pivot like everyone else. We certainly have that data, and we would actually recommend moving forward in that way on next year, so that you're coalesced behind the things you have in common. Turns out this council had a whole lot in common that it viewed as its budgetary priorities. So ideally, moving forward, once we recover from the season we're in, we can give that path a try.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is Mayor Mike Hoffman. I'm afraid that I can take one more question, but then we allocated 20 minutes for CABC, and then we've got Citizens Advisory Committee on Housing and Community next, and I don't want to cut them short. So are there any further questions from members of council, the CABC?
Mayor.
Councilmember Moyo.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. My question is on the reliance of sales tax as a source of revenue. From an equity standpoint, the percentage of low-income communities' income that goes towards sales tax is higher than it would be for a higher income earner. So can one of you all comment on kind of that thought on the equity piece and how we might overcome that from a revenue standpoint?
And certainly I'll lead in, and if any of the subcommittee chairs want to hop on, and I'll be concise. We know that there are other opportunities to increase revenue as we take a look across the 3 multi-billion-dollar industries in Aurora. I think there's not in this window, not in this season, but CM, I believe there's an opportunity once we get on the other side of this to have a real conversation with those 3 multi-billion-dollar industries to do their part to level up. And so there was some discussion about that this time. We don't know that was something that we could support a conversation with coming into this afternoon, but we do have folks who have an interest in pursuing that line once we get on the other side of this budgetary exercise. Thank you for raising that.
Could I add to that?
Of course.
We formed this task force for retail, dining, and entertainment. One of the things that they might develop would be a sliding scale for our city. So there are various tools and mechanisms that would help us work with both low income and our very fortunate citizens as well. So I think there should be tools that could be developed to address all of the issues that a city of our size begins to face.
Thank you both.
Thank you. Appreciate the question.
Mayor, I have a comment. Mayor?
Councilmember Bersen's last comment, we're moving on. We are late. We are behind on schedule.
Okay. I've never seen a type of schedule, but that's okay. I just wanted to say that I'm very concerned with the amount of absences and resignations on this committee. I've never seen 4 resignations on one committee this size. So that concerns me, because this committee is one that you don't just jump on and jump off. You know, delving into a budget takes time. So I'm just really concerned with that. And I look forward to next year, and hopefully we won't have the jumping in and jumping out thing. So thank you. That's what I wanted to say.
Okay. Thank you, CABC. I want to thank you so much for all your hard work on this. What a great job. I really appreciate it, and look forward to working with you in the years to come. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Citizens Advisory Committee on Housing and Community. Sorry, and Community Development.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I know Lynn, our chair, is on, and he was going to start the presentation off. Lynn, are you there and able to get your video and audio on? I just heard him, so I'm gonna give him one more second.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead, jump in.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor Kaufman and members of City Council. You have received the July 30th letter presenting the budget recommendations for 2021. In addition, we would like to present a slideshow for further information. We will open for questions after the presentation. My co-presenters are Jessica Prosser, Community Development Manager, and Jeff Hancock, Financial Supervisor. Jessica, you want to take it from here? Did you hear that?
Yeah, Lynn, you were going to present the first few slides. You want to go ahead and do that?
Yes, ma'am. Okay, the first one we have is CDBG grant and the program income for that. And you can see the total is $3 million. You can see the 8 different areas that we divided up. And I think also you received a report showing the figures in the breakdown from each area. And the first thing that I'll discuss on that is under CGB, we had the Northwest Aurora Alley paving program for $400,000. At our last attended meeting for our board, I requested that I could present a request not to, for our money to be spent on paving, which I think should be in public works. $400,000 would be a lot of housing. And I think the need for housing now would outweigh the need for paving 4 more alleyways when we have over another 100 of them to go anyway. Are there any questions at this time on this particular slide?
Do you know how much we've accomplished in terms of the alleyway program?
Yes, sir.
How many we got now?
There's over like 240 alleyways, and we've over the years they have taken the money to pave a little over half of those, sir.
Okay, thank you. Okay, please proceed.
Okay. The second page we have is the projected funding for home grant, general fund match, and the whole program income, which is estimated. I think you can see there the 3 areas that will be taken care of there, and also on the breakdown of the actual figures on the other report. Are there any questions in this area, sir?
You know what might be better? Let's just go through the whole presentation, and then let's open it up to questions from members, council members.
Okay, sir. Okay, the next slide would be the 2001 projected funding for the emergency solutions area. We have $250,000 there for the 3 areas on your sheet or on the slide. And at this time, I will turn it over to Jessica.
You can go to the next. Thanks, Lynn. Go to the next slide. And then we wanted to include the COVID-related funds from HUD. Council is aware of these funds. We've presented them over the past few months, but we do have about 1.7 million of CDBG related COVID funds. These funds can be used for pretty much any of the activities we would typically use CDBG funds for. They would just need to have some type of relation to COVID. And then we've received 2 allotments of the ESG COVID funds. These have a lot more flexibilities than our typical emergency services grants, and we will be allocating some of those through the homeless services RFP process. We'll also be putting out another notice of funding in the next few weeks, and these will go to things like additional shelter space to accommodate social distancing. They will go to additional rapid rehousing dollars, additional street outreach, additional eviction prevention, and these dollars will be useful beyond the CARES dollars when some of those run out. So we wanted to make sure those were clearly combined into our budget. We have a 2-year horizon on the ESG funding and a 6-year horizon on the CDBG COVID, with half of it needing to be spent in the first 3 years. Next slide, please. And then we just wanted to highlight, we've been working hard with the CHD committee through the housing strategy process from the beginning, and they've also been great advocates for the, the affordable housing gap financing process that we've just gone through this summer. Kind of re-engaging with that committee and bringing them up to speed on the housing strategy, broadening the scope a little bit of the committee beyond just the HUD funding has been important, bringing them up to speed on some of our homelessness programs as well. I've enjoyed working with the committee so far. We have a couple new members that were appointed this spring, and we've been moving along virtually, doing everything we need to. So that is all we have, except for any questions or comments from council.
Is there any more to the presentation?
No, that's the last slide.
Okay, oh, please, questions from council. Are there any questions from council? Okay. Well, thank you very much for your presentation, for your hard work. What you do is very important, and myself and the council really appreciates all that you do. Thank you so much. Okay, the next presentation is by Citizens Water Advisory Committee.
Mayor and City Council.
Okay, Janet, please proceed. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm waiting for the slides to come up.
Okay.
I think. I'm not sure if Greg or Marshall have the slides.
Yeah, this is Marshall. I'm trying to share the content, but I don't know if I have permission to do that.
Someone needs to make you the presenter, Marshall.
Yeah.
Stan is the presenter right now.
This is Greg. Greg Hayes was sent the slides shortly before this presentation, so he has them, if he could show them. Oh, there's Marshall.
Is Greg in the other room?
Oh, there we go.
There we go.
Okay.
Thank you. So Mayor and City Council, thank you for the opportunity to present to you this cold Tuesday afternoon. The purpose of the Citizens Water Advisory Committee is to provide counsel and to give suggestions, recommendations to the Water Department and City Council on all phases of budget, departmental work plans, operational needs, strategic planning, long-range capital improvements, and financial planning. CWAC is comprised of 7 members, 6 representing residential ratepayers and 1 representing commercial ratepayers. This year, we welcomed 3 new members to CWAC. The committee reviewed the residential rate structure at our October 8th and our May 12th, 2020 meetings. At our July 14th, 2020 meeting, we reviewed and discussed the proposed 2021 Water Department budget. We looked at the 2021 revenue projections, operational, and capital expenditures. Next slide. The Water Fund is $70.6 million in operation expenses, $22.8 million in debt service, $150.1 million for capital project expense. The Wastewater Fund, which includes stormwater, $58.8 million in operating expenses, $19.2 million in debt service, and $79.7 million for capital projects expense. We had our full delivery of 10,000 acre-feet of water for the WISE Water Infrastructure and Supply Efficiency Contract started June 1 of 2020. The 2 biggest storage projects for Aurora Water are Wild Horse Reservoir, planned to hold between 60,000 and 85,000 acre-feet of water when hopefully completed in the late 2020s. Also, Box Creek Reservoir, which is anticipated to hold between 20,000 and 60,000 acre feet. Additionally, Aurora is working with its Eagle River MOU partners to develop our existing water rights in the Homestake area, which could include additional storage. In addition, Aurora Water's Capital Projects Delivery Services section in Planning Engineer Division has 50 projects under construction, under design, or being studied. One of our biggest discussions was the proposed change from the current 3-tiered rate structure to the new proposed 4-tier rate structure for 2021. Having 4 tiers will allow for more options and flexibility in the future. This new structure will give Aurora Water the ability to spread additional costs out more evenly than the old structure. Low usage customers will pay the lower rate. This new structure will also strengthen our conservation message to higher water users. Next one. CWAC supports the 2021 Water and Wastewater Fund budgets. The majority of the committee supports the proposed residential rate structure change. This will help indoor use component and again, provide conservation message. We did have 2 members that were opposed due to high concerns for the higher costs during peak irrigation months. In conclusion, although the committee did not get the opportunity to visit any of the treatment plants or participate in the water tour, we stayed very active, enjoyed a wide variety of presentations by the Aurora Water staff. I and the committee appreciate the knowledge and expertise that the staff brings to us every month and would like to thank them. They are never too busy to answer a question. We believe we have the best water department in the country. Thank you for your time today. And are there any questions?
Mayor Dave Gruber. Mayor Dave Gruber. Mayor.
Councilmember Gruber, sorry.
Thank you for the report, Janet. I appreciate the analysis that the team went through and their conclusions. And I also apologize that you weren't able to go on the trip.
Yeah.
Council member just did go out and got to see a few different sites on a one-day trip. I did want to ask a question though about projected growth of our requirements for water versus the projected growth of our water resources. You had talked about the Wild Horse Reservoir and a couple of the others. Did the committee talk about how those match up against Aurora's projected growth and develop any sense of comfort as to whether or not we're on the right path where we don't have enough water going forward or we have too much?
Oh, we can never have too much water. No, actually we did look at the projections. We seem to be very much in line with being able to handle the growth. Obviously having Wild Horse and Box Creek as additional storage is very important to being able to handle that growth, especially as we continue to grow east. But we appear, based upon what we've looked at, to be very, very much in line for being okay with our growth.
Thank you, Janet.
Mm-hmm.
Further questions? Janet, what do you think about the WISE program right now, and what do you think going forward that's going to mean for Aurora?
I'm not sure I can answer that question. Maybe Marshall can step in.
Oh, Marshall?
Yeah, so WISE is on track. Janet mentioned we reached the full subscription capacity starting in June. So we are at capacity as anticipated, which will bring about $10 million of revenue into the water fund in any given year. And we'll use that continually to help pay off some of the debt that we're carrying for Prairie Waters, which will subsequently help stabilize water rates for our customers. So it's a partnership that's working well. It also is our backup supply for if we get unanticipated impacts in our own surface water system, we would interrupt those WISE deliveries and bring the reuse water that we use for WISE into our own system to help cover us for drought. So far it's working very well, and we anticipate it continuing to meet our needs in the future.
Any other questions? Well, Marshall, and Janet, if you'd like to comment on this, there was a pretty big story in the Denver Post over the weekend and about our water strategy, and I wonder if either one of you would like to comment on that story.
Go ahead, Marshall.
Okay. Yeah, I can say a few things.
Sure, please.
We do have our Eagle River Memorandum of Understanding with Colorado Springs and some West Slope partners that was signed back in 1998. We have additional water rights up in the Homestake area, but in order to utilize those water rights, we need, and we've recognized we would need additional infrastructure. Originally, that infrastructure was anticipated to be an expansion of the Homestake Reservoir. That project was opposed by the local entities, and that's what actually resulted in that Memorandum of Understanding that we signed. It does anticipate about 10,000 acre feet of additional water for us, but we're going to have to create some kind of infrastructure to develop or to capture that 10,000 acre feet of water that is currently flowing downstream to the Colorado River. One of the concepts we've been looking at recently is called the Whitney Creek Reservoir that Janet referenced briefly. It is in a highly sensitive area, and we're looking at it from a conceptual perspective right now. So we're just getting started looking at, is it feasible? What would the impacts be? What are the sensitive areas? But what we've run into historically up in that area is anytime we start any discussion about concepts that we're looking at or potentially going to evaluate, it generates a lot of interest. There are the parties that were originally opposed to what was called Homestake 2 quickly become engaged again. So we know we're going to have difficult conversations. There will be a lot of conversations. The article referenced some fen areas. Fen are a very specific type of wetlands. There actually there's not been a wetland delineation done of the area yet. So fens haven't been defined or quantified. That would be part of the process. Wetlands of any type, obviously, we would try to minimize or avoid impacting. There was also a Holy Cross Wilderness area that was referenced in the article, and it was implied or stated that we would inundate part of that wilderness area. That is not the case, even with the conceptual possibilities that we're looking at. We would avoid inundating any wilderness area. But there's also roadless area up there. And so we're trying to coordinate how do we minimize impacts to capture those water rights that Aurora has owned for some time now and be able to get those into the city. So it will be a long, very discussion-rich process where we'll have people who are very strongly opinionated about what we're doing and how we're doing it. We anticipate that process is going to take a couple of decades, and there will be likely some additional articles that are published, some additional opinions, and some additional permitting processes. The permit that's pending is an investigative type permit to allow us to get some borings of the geology. We're not even really sure right now for the concept if we could construct infrastructure to make the concept work. It also referenced up to 20,000 acre feet of storage. It would likely be much smaller than that. Really what we'd be looking at, and it kind of alluded to this, is more of a 4-bay concept where we would capture water rights and move them into, say, a wild horse reservoir that we're in the process of constructing in order to minimize impacts to a sensitive area. So it was an interesting article. The reporter actually did a pretty good job trying to pull together a lot of complex pieces. But that might be something that warrants additional discussion. And so we'll probably look to agendize an Eagle River MOU discussion for council in the near future to get into to more of those details.
So that you could say that changes our strategy somewhat from a planning perspective, the fact that it might be tied up in litigation for some time.
Honestly, we're anticipating litigation no matter which direction we go with that. So we're accounting for that in the process. We've actually retained outside expertise to help us plan and coordinate through that process, but we don't necessarily anticipate anything we try to do up there not having some parties come out with opposition and or likely litigation. So we're accounting for it. I don't know if it will adjust the strategy. Again, the approach that we're trying to go through is to get the conversation started, identify the least impactful alternatives, and then have those discussions to see if we can create local benefits from a project like that and minimize environmental impacts at the same time.
So it sounds like you anticipated this. Okay, are there any further questions? Janet, thank you so much for all the work of your committee. Really appreciate it. And sorry we couldn't all go up this year on the water tour, but we'll do it next year.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you all. Have a nice night.
Thank you. We will reconvene at 5:30 to have the budget overview. The special study session for Tuesday, September 8th is reconvened, and I'll defer to the city manager for presentation of his proposed budget.
Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate that. Yes, we're looking at the presenting the 2021 budget for the city of Aurora, and we will lead it off with just quick agenda for what we'll go over this evening. So I'll just make some brief introductory remarks, then turn it over to Greg Hayes, our budget officer. We'll be hearing from the other appointees, city attorney, court administrator, presiding judge, civil service administrator, and public defender. And then we will run through the proposed budget, myself and the deputy city managers. And so with that, I'll just go into talking a little bit, real briefly, about the approach to the 21 budget. Obviously, as we've been talking with you for the last 6 months, we have been trying to keep you up to date with the issues that have been brought up just by the pandemic and the closing of businesses and the by federal programs through the stimulus package approved back in the CARES package approved back in March. And as you've been well aware, we had to close the gap in fiscal year 2020 budget, the $26+ million balancing that we needed to do, and then the almost $33 million balancing that we need to do in order to balance revenues and expenditures in the 2021 budget. As the CABC in their review of the revenues and expenses, I think they did a really good job of looking at what Leeds has done, what we've done, what's some other national reference points in terms of how you come up with these projections. And I think one thing that they touched on that is really important is that consumer confidence. Just because this isn't like previous recessions. In this recession, we're looking at an additional factor, the whole pandemic, and what that does for confidence when you talk about vaccines and medications to treat COVID and so on. It complicates it even further. So, in terms of presenting this budget, we're doing it not knowing whether we'll have future federal responses. Congress goes back into session, and whether or not they'll, extend the current CARES Act, whether there'll be a new legislation that creates additional funding. We also don't know what's going to happen with unemployment. It's not just as simple as employees going back to work. For many of them, there's no work to go back to with businesses shutting down. Again, another complicating factor. And then for ourselves, we are planning to eliminate positions. We have a hiring freeze currently in effect, and we are planning to eliminate positions in the 2021 budget. It's not that many positions, but we're also going to continue to hold positions vacant, as are several of the other appointees. And so that will have an impact both on workload of the employees left behind, but also, we've tried to make reductions based on minimizing impact on programs and services, but we can't say that there will be no impact. So those are all things that go into preparation for this budget. We'll review a couple of things before I turn it over to Greg. But just in terms of sources of funds, as you can see from this, we're approaching $1 billion in terms of sources of funds. Taxes making up 35% and charges for services 30%, so 65%. Obviously, the majority of the sources coming from those two sources. In terms of appropriations or expenses, 918 million, almost 920 million, 40% general fund, and then also you can see water, wastewater, capital, and operating exceeding 40%. So between those two funds, we're talking over 80% of appropriations.
Jim?
Yes.
Or Mayor? Mayor, is it okay if I jump in for 1 second?
I'm sorry, Mayor Pro Tem, go ahead.
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt Jim. I tried to put this in the chat, but it didn't go through. Just wanted to see if there was a way to address previous special study sessions where we had the CABC present. We had more opportunity as council members just to ask some more questions or clarify. And I don't know if I'm the only one or others wanted that opportunity. And I know right now we're in the city manager's portion, but if there's a way, or if any other council members, I don't even know if CABC is back on the line, that we can.
Yeah, I don't think they're on the line. I think, that was agreed to before, the 20 minutes of each group, and then we had a discussion afterwards and felt that the best way to do it next time would be to, because the time wasn't utilized by the Citizens Advisory Committee on Housing and Community and the Citizens Water Advisory Committee. And so to go back, to put the CABC at the end and give them 30 minutes and give the other two 15 and 15, I think would have worked better. And so I'll take responsibility for it. And if there's another way we can get questions from council members to CABC, we'll certainly do so. But City Manager, please proceed.
Yeah, just so then moving on to our capital improvement plan, you can see, again, water and wastewater make up the bulk of that 5-year plan of $1.2 billion. And then the rest, mainly the capital projects, making up 20%. So that's a big picture overview. And so I'll turn it over to Greg Hayes now to take over. You're muted, Greg. Greg, you're muted. No.
Okay. So now we might need to turn. Okay.
All righty. I've got a couple slides here, and we in the budget office decided before we with this night we wanted to go ahead and give you something fun to do. So we created a budget drinking game during this. Every time I use the word uncertain, you have to drink. All right. So with that, here we go. A lot of this information came out from the one-on-one packet that you saw we gave you back in July. So there's some of the stuff I'm going to kind of gloss over. If you want me to go into something in some more detail, just let me know. All right. In the general fund, we've told you about the fact that the Leeds School of Business developed our 2021 budget process. They look at 78% of our revenues and sales, auto use. They did produce multiple forecast scenarios for us. They focused on baseline, and we focused on the pessimistic of the three different scenarios that they gave us based on COVID-19. We did receive multiple forecasts from them, and I kind of talked about it a little bit a couple of months ago with you all, where the first one, we stuck with the initial forecast, but then they gave us a second forecast, which was much worse. And then they gave us a third forecast that was kind of looked like the first forecast. So we stuck with the initial one. And so this is a picture of the different forecasts. And the blue line at the top is what our initial budget book said back in 2020. As you can see, the pessimistic line is rough and gets rougher before coming back strong in 2022. That's that purple line. Their baseline is the green line in there. And so that's got about somewhere 4 or 5% drop in 2020 before coming back a little bit and then coming back strong after that. We actually adjusted that a little bit for factors that we already knew as things were coming up. Had a little bit more, for example, we had a check coming in building material use tax. And so we took that into account, some of the stuff that they wouldn't know. And so our 2020 numbers are a little bit better than theirs. In 2021, it's actually a little bit worse because of property tax. They didn't have in their projection that we would have to revert the $3 million worth of property tax back to the citizens in 2021. So a little bit less than that. In the out years, what we basically did is we just said, we're going to take their numbers and change and make everything just about 10% better. Every number, if they had said we were going to go down 5%, we said, well, we're going to project to go down 4.5. And the reason for that is because nobody really knows what's going on, and I don't want to actually have to get rid of positions and such unless I really know that I have to do that. So that's why we went into that. You've seen this slide before, the effect of the coronavirus. I haven't changed the numbers from before, even though the numbers did change a little bit. So it's showing how coronavirus affected the previous 2020 balanced budget. The numbers now for 2020 projection is actually a shortfall of about 26.1. So it's a little bit more than we earlier anticipated. And the reason for that is because when we made these numbers, we didn't know that there were going to be protests. And so there were protest costs that we projected into our 5-month review that we didn't have before. So up just a little bit. 2021 is still right at that 32.9 that we told you about during the one-on-one packets. All right. There's a lot of words here. I'm not going to go through all of it, but I do want to talk about the fact that we are projecting to have declines in 2020 flat 2021, but then we're expecting in our leads projection, we're expecting pretty significant growth in 2022. So you'll notice that first bullet is talking about full general fund revenues were declined by 5% in 2020, and then kind of a slow 1.5% growth in 2021. But if you look at that, growth in 2022 is projected at 8.4%. Sales tax is also following suit, down 5.6, kind of a flat, up 1.2 in 2021, but then significant growth in 2022. Property tax is non-reassessment year, so we're not going to get the revenue, the $3 million that we got this year. Basically, what happens in property tax when you have to give back some money, and if you remember, we're over Tabor, we'll have to give back $3 million. You get the money in, and then you give it back the next year, and so that's why we have a 10% decline in there. The next one is important to me because I want you all to know we have some big numbers of increases coming back. In 2021 in places such as lodger's tax, external charges, because those things dropped off a cliff in 2020. And so 93.7% increase, you look at that and say shenanigans, Hayes. What that really means is that it's cutting in half in 2020 or even more than half, probably like 70%, and then projecting to come back to some level in 2021. We are uncertain about all of this, especially in terms of lodger's tax and those sorts of things, because we just don't know what the tail is on this whole COVID crisis. If it ends at the end of the year, great. If it keeps going on, that could be that could mean that these numbers, these projections here, are probably a little bit too strong. Capital projects are expected to drop some, and you will hear about a $2.5 million worth of amendments in our revenues. So what could affect these projections? Well, the national economy is definitely in uncertain waters. So the stock market right now is awfully tumultuous. The 2020 unemployment, which was 3.8%, went up to 14.4%, and then is coming back down. And a lot of this, you have to remember that a lot of people got checks, the federal stimulus funding during this time. And so without those checks, things definitely would have been much more dire. Our economy is also in uncertain waters. Sales tax drop actually depends upon where you are. This is awfully interesting. So we've been tracking with other cities how their sales tax is working, how the sort of highs and lows they've got. I'm going to give you a couple numbers here that are just interesting. So I want you to think about our 12.6% down. That was our worst month that we had. Let me give you a couple of other cities and their worst month in that time frame. Boulder was down 29%. Centennial was down 30%, and then had a month after that where they were down 20%. Colorado Springs was down 22%. Golden down 24%. Lakewood down 31%. Littleton's down 30% and actually has multiple months of being down. So it really depends on where you are that we've got. Arvada, by the way, wasn't down very much at all. They had 1 month that was about 4% down, and then they've been up since then, but Arvada does tax groceries, and we do not. So a lot of people were spending money on groceries at that time. Colorado unemployment rate is once again, it is still high. It is still higher than the Great Recession, and if you look at the county unemployment rates, they're still in double-digit levels. Leeds actually has a business confidence index that they put out once a month or once a quarter, where 50 on their Leeds confidence index is neutral. And so it dropped to 29.7 in the second quarter and rose to 44.3 in the third quarter. Aurora, so here in a couple slides, Aurora's had some interesting good news. In about 2 slides, I'll let you know about that. But you do know that Tabor is limiting our use of property tax by over $3 million. And this is a big thing for me. There's a vote on Gallagher in November. And if Gallagher is not repealed, the Aurora projection for property tax is going to go down $7 million. The last thing I want to talk about Aurora and the uncertainty here, we have had a history of lagging in the national recession. So what I want you to do is I want you to think back to 2001, right around the time of 9/11. Greg was just joining in the budget office. He was in the revenue thing. He's the one that caused the recession back in in 2001. If you look at our revenue numbers in Aurora during the time that the nation was in a recession, which started around the first quarter of 2001 and went kind of through the third into the fourth quarter of 2001, we were actually doing pretty well. Our sales tax was up about 5% during that time. We all got crushed when 9/11 happened and lost some money after that. But that very next January is where we had our largest drop ever, which was 13% off of the prior year. And that was after the national recession was basically coming back. So we have had a history of lagging the national recession. The general fund sources, 54%, just last time sales tax rate was increased was 27 years ago. Property taxes around 11%. Last time we increased that was about 20 years ago. And I say this a lot, but 2/3 of the money that come into us is based on somebody buying something. So the economy is awfully important to this. So here's me giving you some interesting good news. I want you to look over. So look at May, there's that negative 12.6% down, the second worst drop we've ever had in sales tax. Look at what happened in July. Up 10.9%. That's basically $2 million over last year in July. It was the single biggest July we've ever had. And you're going, holy moly, Greg, what is going on here? We had huge sector, huge money coming in, one-time payments from technology sectors, including a single payment from a single company of $1.7 million. And that's not a company that we track. It's kind of below our radar, but we're still making sure that it's our money to use, but it's the single largest payment that we can find that's come in. And it came in this July, $1.7 million. And if you think about it, if you do the math, that's based on $45 million worth of sales for this one company. When I come to your council meetings and I talk about the fact that if you find a $100 bill on the ground, don't go put a down payment on a car, that's exactly what this is. This is one-time money. We don't think that we're going to be able to get this all the time. We're happy that we have it now, but it is definitely one-time money, but it is good news. It is good news. And if you take away that one-time money, we're sort of flat. We're kind of flat in July if you take out all the one-time monies, which is also not bad news versus our projection, right? Now I will tell you that this when I look at this chart, this makes me happy. This is good news. I have no idea what the rest of the year is going to hold. And I have no idea whether if a cure comes out and all of a sudden we're all better, or if snow continues on and all of a sudden all the restaurants are going to close because they can't do outdoor seating anymore. Or if in the fall when flu season comes open, if all of a sudden there's going to be a slate of closures and such like that because they can't tell the difference between the flu and COVID. So there's a lot of things that make us uncertain about the future. Although I will say we like where we are right now, and if there's a risk to the forecast right now, I would say that it's a positive risk, that we're probably going to have a little bit more money. I just can't promise that. So 2020 all appropriations real fast. We are still about 55% public safety. If you look at courts and legal and police and dispatch and fire, the numbers really didn't change a whole lot from last year. I would tell you that we did do, and we're going to talk a little bit about some reorganizations that we had that kind of affected some of these numbers, but cuts themselves didn't really do a whole lot. Police was 1% up from last year. Fire was 1% up. Public Works, even though they had cuts, because Public Works have fleet. So general management used to own fleet, the fleet function. We reorged the fleet function over into Public Works, so Public Works actually went up a little bit. And so admin and support went down a little bit, but basically it's kind of the same picture as it typically is. So let's look at the general fund budget creation, or base budget, $376 million. This assumes a 0% net compensation and 0% budget increase for health and dental. We do have some benefits. There's a couple more benefits coming through that I think maybe if we want more information, we can sure find it. We've added a couple benefits minimal adjustments to the city employee share premiums. There's hardly anything there. The net base adjustments is less than $1.5 million, primarily due to decreasing the CPF transfer, the leases, the utilities. We kind of all talked about those during the one-on-ones, and that then we offset some of the step and grade and increases in risk that we had going on. I will tell you, $1.5 million is hardly anything. If you think about our typical, when we do a 3% pay increase, the base budget would go up $6.5 million all by itself. So $1.5 million is not much of a jump at all in our $400 million budget. We have $12.3 million of mandated cost savings versus the previous outlook, the one that was in the 2020 budget. That $12.3 million does include $2 million in savings by not hiring the 15 police officers. You are going to see total cuts of $9 million. That's $6.2 million ongoing and $2.8 million one time. There's one add in here. And it's really more of a transfer. We're transferring over the Everyday Adoption Center from gifts and grants over into the general fund. You are going to see new revenues of $2.5 million. And you will see here that we do have a balanced 2021 proposed budget. All right, and we definitely talked about this during the one-on-ones, but all the money we didn't use in here in order to balance 2021. We did not use the policy reserve. That is unchanged. We did not use the table reserve. We did not use the money set aside for I-70 Piccadilly. We did use some money for technology projects. When we first talked about it, it was at $5.9 million. We dropped it to $4.9 million, and that's because we were able to use CARES funding to buy computers that we would have used that money for. So basically, the CARES funding was able to offset some of the money set aside for that. And our operating reserve at $3.6 million is right at the 1% that we need it to be. All right, looking in the longer term outlook, what you'll notice there is that 2022 is balanced to within $3.4 million. Now that is about 0.8%. And given all the cuts and everything that we're going through in 2020 and 2021, I tend to think that's good news, that's awfully close to being balanced. My caveat to that is that if that vote fails in November for property tax, that $3.4 million is going to become $10.4 million. All right, you're going to hear all about operating amendments, about $8.7 million in all funds. You're going to have about $2.5 million worth of revenue, and we are eliminating 19 positions. All of them are vacant. If you want to follow along, you can follow along on page B, on attachment 8, which starts on page B22. Those 19 positions actually account for 0.6% decrease in the amount of FTE in all funds. In capital, there's $295 million in amendments. The vast majority of that are in water and wastewater, 286 of that. Actually, CPF is actually going down. Amendments are decreasing in the 5-year plan. Everything else is coming up a little bit. What you're seeing here, if you look at the next line down where it says $47.7 million reduction in 2021 and increases in the out years, is that based on an abundance of caution and just being sure about where we are, we're actually going to defer some capital projects in several different funds into the future, just in case we need to switch gears quickly. If you want to see more about the capital amendments, you can go to attachment 12, which is on B33, or you can go into the CIP section, and the amendment section starts on page G25. With that, I'm going to tell you about the presentation order. We're going to start with the council commission appointees. Then Jim will come up and talk about the rest of the departments that aren't under a DCM, followed by Jason's group, followed by Nancy's group, followed by Roberta's group. So if you have any questions, or if you want to wait until the end, Mayor, I'm not sure how you want to handle it. We're going to start off.
I think members, you can ask questions anytime.
Mayor, I have a couple of questions.
Councilmember Coombs.
The financial outlook. So, and this is in that financial outlook section. I know you mentioned briefly the change in costs for fleet, fuel, and risk at 6% each year, but then that seems to be achieved by some decreases in some of our utilities and other types of costs, and a very significant increase in risk. It was like 26.3% increase in premiums. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the details of that 26.3% increase.
I can. Let me pop up a slide here. So there we go. In the risk fund, yeah, our 2020 is expected to be a little bit under, but our 2020 expenditures are budgeted to be nearly $1 million more. About $500,000 of that is premium costs. And these premium costs are kind of all over the board here, but a lot of them are trying to find the big ticket items on here. Enough. If Deanna is on here, if you could help out a little bit. I know that the property is up quite a bit. And also public entity liability is up 40% as part of that as well.
And those are this is Deanna Giordano. Those are the significant increases that we're experiencing. They're not unique to Aurora. I think in the state of Colorado, across the other lines of insurance coverage, they're seeing increases just because of some of the weather. For us, the public entity liability is increasing by 40%. So that is an area that we're seeing, again, not unique to Aurora, across different municipalities.
Not only are the premiums increasing, but also the assumption of claims are also expected to increase, which is that next line down with the general liability and the vehicles and property.
Greg, Mike Kaufman, on the revenue side and the Wayfair decision, how much is that helping out?
That helped us out a lot back in 2019. And I'm going to hazard a guess here. I'm looking at my revenue people, maybe a couple million, $1.5 million.
Oh, is that okay?
And it's already in our base. So we're probably not going to see another bump from it again, because it was kind of fresh and new back in 2019, but right now it's in our base in 2020 and in the future.
And we're still not getting third-party vendors, right?
That's correct at the moment, okay. But that's part of the $700,000 worth of revenue increase that you're going to find in finance.
And Greg, that's supposed to start September 1st.
Okay. Further questions?
Mayor?
Councilmember Coombs.
So I just had one more in the long-term projection section on page D5. There's a section that shows overtime compensation and special pay. So I was wondering if we could get some more information about what the special pay is, and then also can we get, not right now obviously, but a breakdown by department of the overtime compensation that's projected at $7 million this year.
Okay, so you want a breakdown by department of overtime and special pay?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
We'll make that happen. And thank you for reading that section.
Okay, further questions right now? Okay, seeing none, please proceed, Greg.
All right, let me see what, I'm gonna go back to the slide I was on.
I think we're on city attorney.
Right, well, okay, so I'm gonna go back to 22. All right, and with that, Dan, you're up.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. The City Attorney's Office coordinated and used the same processes as the city managers used on the overall budget. Do want to thank Jim, want to thank Terry Velasquez, want to thank Greg Hayes, but we especially want to thank Jackie Eamon. Jackie Eamon was our lifeline through the budget process, and a big thank you to her. So what we did, much as the city manager did with the overall budget, we froze things. We froze everything that we could. So our consulting services were frozen, all of our travel and training, including continuing legal education, was frozen. We actually left positions open and vacant and haven't filled 3 of those positions. That returned $430,500 in 2020. The positions that are being held open are a prosecution position, prosecution attorney, a legal admin, and a victims assistance liaison in the court. We're planning, in the budget for 2021 is built on leaving those same positions vacant. Same is true for travel, training, everything, except we have one add back, which is our continuing legal education to keep our attorneys up to speed on the issues such as COVID and the social justice issues that are currently outstanding. So that's a short wrap up of where we're at.
Any questions? Okay, Greg?
Mayor?
Oh, I'm sorry, council member
Lawson.
Lawson, I'm sorry. I can't see the picture here. Okay.
No, that's all right. Dan, I just had a question. Does the city pay for the CLE, to keep, is that what you were talking about the training piece or the CLEs? Does the city pay for those for the attorneys?
Yes, it does.
Okay. Is that incorporated in the budget somewhere? What is the cost for that?
And it's our travel and training budget. I don't have an exact number.
But could you get that for me? I'm interested in how much you guys.
We'll do. Absolutely. We'll send it to you.
Okay. Thank you.
Further questions? Okay. Thanks. Oh, I'm sorry.
Councilmember Murillo.
Councilmember Murillo. Sorry, I can't see your picture.
That's okay. Dan, am I recalling correctly that the grant funding, is that the Jack grant?
There is a Jack grant that disappeared for this year. So we've actually lost that person, that the grant, much, just like everybody's having shortfalls, they canceled our grant. So we actually lost another position because of that.
Okay, because I understood that the is that through the transforming safety funds? Because my understanding was that it wasn't eliminated, rather it was just cut in half.
And it was cut to zero. It was supposed to be cut, and it went to zero.
Okay, I might need to follow up because again, from what I recall, in participating in that process was that the grant wasn't completely eliminated. But we can touch base offline, I guess.
Absolutely. I'd be happy to get you that information.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions on the city attorney's office? Seeing none, thanks, Dan. Greg?
Right. Next up is Zelda.
Hi, everyone. It's happy to be here. Am I not supposed to show you my face? Am I supposed to be hiding? Everybody else is. I just want you to know I got clothes on, okay? Okay. Wow, this has been an interesting year. I think that's just a major understatement, isn't it? I too would like to do a shout out to the finance division department, particularly the budget division. Jackie Eman is, like Dan said, our lifeline. And Jackie, you're on, I know you are. I just want to personally thank you for all the work that you've done for us this year. What we have done in 2020, early on, like in February, I lost long-term employees due to retirement. So we did not fill those positions starting in February, March, April. We held those positions open. And because of that, you see under the 2020 projection, significant savings due to vacancies. We had vacancies in the court side of the building and also in the judicial facility. And so we will be giving back close to $900,000 back to the city coffers due to those vacancies. In 2021, we're going to hold positions vacant. You see those positions outlined below. While our marshals and detention departments divisions are divisions that we can actually fill, we are still holding a couple positions there because of the the balances that we needed to meet. We're reducing our security equipment, some training and supplies. And as you know, we've been very much impacted with the recent events, the recent protests. So we are using dollars for those services. Also, much of that is taken care of through the CARES project or through the COVID fund. So I am available for any questions that you might have, but that's our budget for 2021. Thank you. Mayor, I think you're muted.
Sorry, Zelda, are you able to use COVID dollars or for the damage that was done to the courthouse? Or?
Yes, sir. There are a couple funds that we were able to use to replace certain things and cover costs. We now have new lights outside of both the AMC and the courthouse and jail, as well as the police department, and those lights were paid through funds that weren't from our own funds. So that was extremely helpful to us. So the courthouse, if you're in your office right now, if you look right outside the building when it gets dark, pretty lit up.
Then how about the windows? How are you going to cover those?
You know, Cindy will be coming on a little bit later, or Jason.
Okay, so capital construction. Okay.
Yes, but we have ordered the glass to replace those windows, and we would be expecting that to be in between 3 to 6 weeks, and then get some replacements there.
Okay. Any other questions?
Mayor Dave Gruber.
Councilmember Gruber.
Just real quick, as far as the windows go, are we going to replace that with standard glass like it was before, or are we going to put in ballistic glass that would withstand attacks?
Well, it was never standard glass, sir. It is two-sided, very thick glass, and we're also looking at possibly later on putting a coating over it, which may be bulletproof. And you know, I'm not the engineer expert there, but it's definitely something a little bit stronger than what we have. But I don't care how strong it is. If you stand there with a damn crowbar beating it down, you're going to break it. It may just shatter, but it's still going to break. It really is going to have to be replaced.
Okay, thanks, E.
You're welcome, sir.
Thanks, Zelda.
You're welcome.
Right.
Greg?
Yep, next one. Technical difficulty. There we go. Is judicial.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council. I too have my clothes on, just like Dr. DuBois, so you can see me as well. And I'm going to remain consistent with both the other appointees, Dan and Dr. DuBois. I too want to thank Terry, Greg, Jackie, Kirsten, the entire finance team. They've done just an amazing job under really, really trying, exceptional circumstances. So we've done our very, very best within the Judicial Department to try to find the cuts that we needed for 2020. We were able to pinch the pennies, hold back on paper clips and paper and everything else that you can think of that may relate to the court, and coming up with the cuts that we needed to reach the number that was being asked for 2020. That carries over into 2021. We don't have any true vacancy savings at this point in time. However, we have lost, and I think both Mayor Pro Tem and members of council, you have received the 3 retirement resignations, actually 2 retirement resignations from Relief Judge Alan Stein and Relief Judge Loretta Huffine. And we also lost another Relief Judge, Andrea Kopenhofer, to the Department of Justice. So we're down 3 relief judges right now. We do not, at this point in time, intend to ask council for consideration for appointing 3 new relief judges. However, that may be an ask that I come to you later. But right now we're trying to do all that we can. It adds to this conversation in that we do, by not using some of our relief staff, not only judges, but other relief staff, do have some savings for our judicial department. And that's what's included in what will be brought to you for the 2021 budget. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Berthens? Hello?
I can see
Councilmember Berthens.
Thank you. Judge, I trust what you say, don't get me wrong, but down 3 judges, will that not put an undue hardship on the other judges?
It has been, and it's been kind of a big ask that I've had to make with the associate judges. It does make them really consider their time away from the court building. They are asked to fill in other divisions as well. So I understand that, but they also understand that this is kind of a team concept that we're taking to get through this tough budget period. We're going to do the best that we can, but there's no doubt about it, Councilman Berthens, and I thank you for asking that. It does have an impact for sure. But
well, hopefully you'll be back in shortly when our revenue comes up and asks for more judges.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for asking that, because it's something that I didn't have. We're absolutely able
to. Okay, Gary.
I can't hear us at all.
Sorry, looks like there's quite a few unmuted.
Okay. Wow. Hey, further questions of the judge? Councilmember Coombs.
So, Judge Day, I just wanted to clarify, and this may be a Greg question also, that those cuts showed up as projected through 2025, that we would maintain those cuts to your division. So is that because you haven't at this time requested the add back of those 3 positions?
Right, and again, it's 3 relief judges, and we only utilize those 3 relief judges when we need them to service the different courtrooms. We are at this point in time, even with the reduction of those 3 and losing those 3 relief judges, able to service all of the division. And so that will carry forward. But again, it is a stress that is put on the rest of the judicial team. There's no question about it.
Further questions? Seeing none, thanks, Judge Day, for all you do. I appreciate it. Greg?
Yep, 1 second. We're technical difficulties here. Now I'm frozen. There goes. There. Oh. Okay, civil service.
Good evening, Mayor, members of City Council. I'll leave my video off to preserve the mystery, much like Mr. Brotzman. The Commission's 2020 budget is projected to come in slightly under budget. However, recent increased legal fees due to police and fire disciplinary appeal hearings may ultimately impact that outcome. For 2021, the budget will vary based on decisions made about future fire and police academies. The budget will also vary based on legal fees from disciplinary hearings. And the outcome of these 2 areas, hiring and legal fees, may necessitate a supplemental appropriation for 2021. The word uncertain describes 2021 for our budget as well. So I will leave it at that and answer any questions you may have.
Questions for the Civil Service Commission? Seeing none, then thank you very much. Thank you for all you do.
Thank you.
Last is public defender.
Mr. Mayor, City Council, Doug Wilson. I
want to thank you for letting me address you tonight. I have to admit that I wasn't expecting when I came in. I'm the new kid on the block, came in January. It's been a fascinating 8 months so far. And I too would like to echo the help that Jackie and Greg have given me, because they pretty much had to take me by the hand and lead me through this process. You can see our budget is pretty small. We have 1.5 or 15.5 FTEs. We have a vacant position. We're able to deal with that vacancy by getting a grant that the state has funded for first appearances. We, the prosecution and the judges and Dr. Boyd's staff, even when COVID hit, we still went to court. And we've been going to court the entire time because of folks that were in custody. And we were able to pick up the slack with that grant-funded position for the First Appearance Center. I also applied for a grant with CARES. We've been awarded that grant to try to help with the increasing workload that we've seen since COVID hit. As you can see, we took a 10% reduction in our public defender attorney staff. Now that's only one position, but it's still 10% of our staff. And as it's set forth right now, we are still looking at holding that position open through 2021. So meager savings of $86,000. I'm not going to promise you I won't come back at some point and tell you or ask you to fill that spot, because as I said, the workload, we're watching that increase as we go forward. But that $1.6 million budget is 90% personnel dollars, and we have very little above that for any additional cuts at this time, but we're giving it a shot, see what we can do. So I'm happy to answer any other questions you guys might have.
Questions of Mr. Wilson, Public Defender's Office.
Mayor Pro Tem Johnston.
Mayor Pro Tem Johnson.
Hi, thank you. Doug, I have more of a comment than a question. I just want to say I really appreciate, I know under your leadership, you've really been looking at other funding opportunities. I know you mentioned possibly the COVID grants and that you've really been pursuing that. So I just want to say I appreciate that if you do ask, if you do have to come back or even with this, that it is in conjunction with that effort of trying to find additional resources, and just wanted to point that out publicly.
Well, thank you. I think we're going to get the CARES money in October. So it's been approved. It's just kind of glacial signing of checks at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions?
Yes, Mayor.
Councilmember McConnell.
Thank you, sir. Doug, good to see you. I do have a question, kind of a follow-up from some of the conversations we've had in the past. About looking through our code and kind of trying to find ways to basically streamline some of our areas where we can actually, I guess, basically begin the work of decriminalizing poverty, for lack of a longer, more flowery way to say that. And I was just wondering if if you had managed to put together like any estimates in terms of like what that might actually save the city in terms of enforcement and court times and things like that as well.
Right. Thanks, Councilmember. I do not have an estimate for you. I am taking a look at the code, and just to quickly educate that the Public Defender's Office accepts without question folks that are indigent, charged with a municipal court ordinance violation. That carries jail time. You are required to provide counsel to those where jail is attached as a potential punishment. If it's not attached, you're not entitled to court-appointed counsel. And so when I ran the state system, we took a shot at trying to de-jailify as opposed to necessarily completely decriminalize some offenses. And I've indicated to Councilmember Marcano that I would take a look at the ordinances and I'm working on that, and I hope to have something to you relatively soon with some suggestions.
All right. Further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much, Mr. Wilson. Oh, Councilmember Gruber.
Yeah, Doug, I just wanted to touch on something. So it's your position, the position of the public defender, that Aurora criminalizes poverty?
What I don't think I use those words, Councilmember Gruber. What I do think it impacts, we only represent poor people. So you have to be indigent to be our attorney. I mean, to be our client. So I think that was actually Councilmember Marcano's actual words, but
yes,
everybody we represent is poor. So I don't know how to get into that debate between you two gentlemen at this point.
Yeah. Very well. Further questions or comments? Seeing none, thank you very much, Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Mayor.
Greg, I think now we're on the proposed budget by the Deputy City Manager.
Actually, Mayor, I'll take over on the departments not under a deputy city manager, and there's not, okay, but I'll go ahead and handle it. So we have general management and information technology. That information technology reports to me, and general management is just the like it sounds, general management. Under that, so in the general management area, we reduced that by just over $200,000 by eliminating the one FTE, and that is the FTE that was occupied by Roberto Venegas as assistant city manager. He's obviously been promoted. That position remained vacant with the idea that we would eliminate it. So there's $200,000 savings there. And then in information technology, we have made reductions of almost $800,000. Those reductions include delaying the PC replacement program. We have an ongoing PC replacement program, and we're able to pause what we were doing because we're adding laptops through CARES funding to partly to go to a one device policy, but also to enable remote working by those employees that are able to work from home. We also have downgraded some Office 365 licenses where the licenses that were tied to certain positions were actually, they didn't need that much capacity. And so we're able to downgrade those and save some money. And then we've also made some cuts on ending certain solutions, small programs in certain departments that were where we're paying ongoing funding, and they were able to migrate over to other solutions. And then also with the remote working, we've been able to reduce significantly the amount of printing that we're doing. And so that we anticipate to be ongoing also, as some employees are able to either continue to remote work or go to a hybrid program where they might be in several days a week and home several days a week. So that covers those. Then we have the capital amendments, the console replacement in the E911 fund out of the Public Safety Communications is deferred to 2021. So that's a change here. And if there's no questions about those, we can move on to operating amendments and start with Deputy City Manager Batchelor.
So we'll go to the next slide. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
All right, I'll apologize in advance for that. So you can see here the 4 departments that I'm going to cover, but before we get to those, I will touch on a couple of other operations that do I work with as well. The first is the Office of Development Assistance. Vanessa Irvin and her team are responsible for that. Their budget is on page F63 in the budget book. They are funded out of the Development Review Fund. We've continued to see activities remain relatively strong in the Development Review Fund. We do have a plan in place to weather an economic downturn, and so we are continuing to monitor activity there very closely. But through the first few months of the pandemic and the economic impacts, we've seen development activity remain, again, pretty strong. So no changes there at this point for that fund. They continue to work with projects that are coming through and providing assistance. The other operation is the Oil and Gas Division. Jeffrey Moore is our manager of the Oil and Gas Division. We have a number of vacant positions associated with that. That's a new division that we just stood up this year. They are on page F66 of the budget. We have delayed kind of staffing up that division just given both the economic uncertainty and sort of some of the turbulent times we've seen in the oil and gas industry. But we are actually probably over the last few months of this year going to begin staffing that up. So we'll be looking to fill the planner position and one of the field inspector positions in that division, and then that division is covered by fees to the operators, and so we will again begin staffing that up at the end of this year, and as Jeffrey continues to get on board, and we'll be coming to council with some major updates for the oil and gas division here in the coming weeks. So with that, I'll jump to the fire department. Chief Gray and the fire department have provided $1.7 million of balancing. Greg noted there was some revenue included in our balancing, and fire department is responsible for a good portion of that along with the finance department. The first, as you can kind of see, there is a fire inspection fee, about $330,000. There's a scene mitigation fee, as we've talked about with council during those one-on-ones. We spend considerable time and resources returning the roadways to a safe, usable conditions, and insurance policies are covering, have an allowance for us to recover some of those costs. And so that is the intent, that we utilize a fee to recover some of those costs associated with that. And then the final fee is for a treat no transport. And that would, as we've discussed with council and provided a response about some more details in that from those one-on-one meetings in your backup, includes where we're having to do lift assists and things like that. So when we're being called out and there's no transport or no fire, things like that, this is a fee, again, to recover some of our costs associated with those type of responses. And then finally, the final reduction is an expenditure reduction. We did move to an overtime model of staffing our medical service units in 2020, and this would be about a $545,000 reduction, about 12,000 hours of reduction in terms of the number of hours that we're staffing those medical service units. We would still have significant number of hours funded in the budget, but this is a reduction to, again, help us balance that budget. So next slide for planning and development service.
Oh, Mayor, Councilmember Hiltz. I think you said yes. I saw a nod.
Councilmember Hiltz, sorry.
Thank you. I just wanted to say I'm glad to see the no transport fee on there. I know that's something that Chief Gray's been looking at for a while, and that fire's been looking to implement, I think, since last year when we first started talking about it. So I'm glad to see that in there. I think that's a really good thing to have for the city.
Mayor?
I can't say. Let's see. Who is it?
It's Councilmember Coombs.
Councilmember Coombs.
So I just wanted to ask a little bit more about this reduction of $545,000 this year, which will escalate in the amount of reduction that constitutes through 2025. That we have the fire department generating more revenue for the city, but then we're seeing that cut. So how is that potentially impacting service to be cutting that medical service unit funding?
So it's just going to reduce the number of hours that we have scheduled for our service units. And so we can get you those exact numbers if you'd like to see them in terms of what that results in terms of the reduction of service.
But Mr. Batchelor, Mike Hoffman, isn't that more to replacing regular hours worked with more staff versus paying overtime?
The medical service units are only staffed with overtime. That was part of the decision.
Oh, they're only staffed.
Okay. Yeah, so the medical service units are only staffed with overtime.
Okay. Further questions? Seeing none.
I forgot to add, if anybody was following along, the fire department is on page F50 in your budget book, or if you're playing budget bingo, that's page F50. The planning and development services is on page F134. And as both Greg and the city manager touched on, we are eliminating a couple of vacant positions there. You can kind of see those associated with that, a GIS planner and a management assistant. And then it does have a one-time reduction of about just under $75,000 associated with the ICSC conference. That's a large retail conference that is typically held each year in the spring. We are expecting that that likely won't have, given the current pandemic situation, won't have the same attendance. And so we are going to go ahead and plan for not attending that in 2021. It's only a one-time reduction that does come back in the budget in 2022 and beyond. And then the final adjustment is the transfer of a quarter of a position, project manager, from the general fund to the designated revenue fund, which is the AURA, so our urban renewal activity. And that position spends considerable amount of time helping to manage our redevelopment and renewal projects. So that's it on planning.
Questions? Thanks. Seeing none, please proceed.
The next one is police. This is on page F142. So it is about $2 million of balancing impact. As Greg had noted, we are not adding the 15 positions in the budget that had been planned for the 2021 budget. So it's about $1.5 million of reduction, and then about $500,000 of one-time costs associated with adding those positions. So that is the major action in the police department. And I'll stop there and take questions.
Questions?
Berzins?
Councilmember Berzins.
Thank you. If you're not going to add the 15, don't we have a huge amount leaving and retiring? Isn't that going to put us more in the hole?
No, so this would be, we are continuing to have academies to replace attrition. So we will continue to have academies that try and maintain our current authorized strength of 744. That additional 15 was supposed to increase the authorized strength from 744 to 759. And so we'll maintain our strength of 744, and we're continuing to monitor retirements, resignations, and other departures, and managing our academy load to try and replace those officers that leave through attrition.
Yeah, that was my next question. Are you watching it really close, because we don't want to get low? I had another question, but it was on something else. Could I go ahead and ask that, Mayor?
No, please.
Okay, and it was the first one, and we didn't stop for questions. You had mentioned our oil and gas division, and you were going to kind of staff it up shortly. What about the money we're losing? What about the revenues we're losing because the wells are not pumping, and they're not increasing with the oil and gas? Aren't we losing money there? Is that already figured into the budget?
That's more of a case of, and I think I'll let Greg and Jackie talk a little bit about that. So we would see oil and gas revenues in a couple of different places. We would see that in property tax from the oil and gas properties that are subject to the city's property tax. And then the other place we would see revenue would be from severance tax, which is collected at the state and then remitted back to, portions of it are remitted back to local jurisdictions. So I don't know if we're expecting if we've heard anything from the counties as to whether or not the valuation for oil and gas properties are expected to decline. In terms of them not drilling the wells, That's probably more of a case of not necessarily lost revenue. It just means it's not coming online as fast as perhaps, with a different economic market that you might expect the wells to be drilled. So at this point, I don't know if it's so much as lost revenues as just delayed revenue coming online. And again, I'll let Jackie and Greg comment as to if we've seen a significant impact. My recollection had been that we'd been very conservative, just given the uncertainties around how quick those may come online, and I don't think we were very aggressive in terms of how quickly those facilities may come online and how much revenue they may produce.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. We aren't expecting a lot of money to come in, so the slowdown and such in terms of the oil isn't necessarily affecting our budgeting near as much as everything else.
Okay.
Thank you.
What further questions?
Mayor?
Okay. I can't see. Councilmember Coombs. Okay.
So Jason, just with respect to the police, so this is just the regular budgeting and hiring of FTEs. This doesn't include overtime costs, right?
No, there's no, yeah. So the overtime costs that we'd had associated for police in terms of the budget, we are not increasing that budget from between 20 and 2021. But I think as Greg had noted, we have seen some significant costs associated with some of the protests and other activities. So we did see some increased overtime costs, and I think Greg's going to be providing some information per your previous question. I mean, I think you're going to see that the police department does make up a good portion of that $7 million that is projected for 2020.
Okay, and then those previous year actuals don't include overtime supplemental requests, or do they?
They would include everything, supplementals and base budget. So actuals are not, again, they're everything that we experienced in that time.
And the overtime is counted under the police budget or in a separate place?
It depends upon the nature of the activity, and same thing for other departments. There's some overtime that we pull and consolidate in sort of a centralized account. So for instance, often for snow removal, when we're doing major snow removal operations, if it's occurring on a weekend or after hours, not on when we're normally budgeting that overtime, those are dollars that'll hit non-departmental. So I don't know how we're accounting for the overtime for police and the other operations for the protests, but we'll include that in the information that we provide you per your previous question.
Thank you.
And I can answer that. The protests we're keeping all together in one place. We want to see all the costs that are coming up, and so we project that actually done at working as well.
Okay.
Everybody's hitting a specific one.
Are there any further questions on this section? Seeing none, please proceed then to the next.
And the last slide is for public safety communications. And so Tina Bonetta is our manager of public safety communications. They are on page F162. Tina has done a tremendous job, much like the chief public defender. She came on board early this year and has just been absolutely in addition to getting her feet on the ground and hit the ground running, she's also had to deal with all that 2020 has brought, just done a tremendous job with that in terms of continuing some of the good work that we had down there. Bob Wesner, as you know, lieutenant in police department, had gone down there as the acting manager and done a really good job to help us kind of stabilize some operations down there. We'd had some pretty significant turnover and some other operational challenges. Bob did a really good job of kind of calming the waters, and Tina's come in and just continued to build on that and done a really good job for us. So with that, we've got about $153,000 of balancing that are ongoing. One of those is the elimination of a vacant supervisor, and then a couple of additional reductions going back to both $38,000 on overtime and then a reduction on holiday benefits. So again, that's related to how we staff the operation. So Tina's continued to tweak that and look at how we staff. And because of those reductions, we think those adjustments, we think we're able to make these reductions with minimal impacts. And again, I think that speaks well of Tina getting in and doing a good job. So with that, I'll see what questions we have on public safety communications.
Questions? Seeing none, thanks.
Thank you all.
Mm-hmm. Right. Then we'll go to
Good evening, everybody. I've done a lot of budgets, but never one quite like this. So thanks to the Budget Office and Finance and all the departments and you folks for bearing with us. But I have 5 departments. Human Resources is primarily an internal support department. Then the larger operating departments, Library and Cultural, Parks, Recreation, Open Space, Public Works, and Aurora Water. So I'll start with Human Resources, and they reduced their budget next year by about $97,000. And it's primarily streamlining training and employee recognition and aligning the budget with previous historic spending. So there are a number of those items that they've done to accomplish the 97, eliminated the RTD Flex Pass, and we really did not have a lot of use of that, maybe 10 to 20 employees with a 30% subsidy, eliminated Summer Splash, which is the employee appreciation. Hopefully one day we'll be able to get back to that, reduced background checks and recruiting software. We are, however, doing background checks on our most vulnerable population. We reduced some training, but we're at cost, but we're actually going to hopefully accomplish the same training with our internal staff and less outside resources. We've reduced HR memberships and supplies and reduced professional services. And that's primarily because we hired a labor relations officer and streamlined the process.
Nancy, could you go over the background check issue again?
We used to do background checks on all our career service. However, we only had 3 to 4 failures, 1 year only 1. So it turned out to be not cost effective, but we're still doing background on those employees that serve the youth and the seniors.
Okay.
Mayor?
Any questions?
Yep, I have a quick question.
Councilmember Combs.
So with respect to that employee appreciation, it looks like that's reflected as being expected to be ongoing through 2025. Is that similarly just an assumption, kind of unless otherwise requested or intentionally changed, that's going to be maintained until it's asked to be brought back?
Yes, anything that we took out of the operating budget is primarily ongoing. So you'll see that in future years. If our situation improves, hopefully that could be one that we would add back.
Other questions?
Okay, the next department.
Councilmember Gruber.
Nancy, I just wanted to, you didn't make any cuts on it, but I just want to make a point that the golf course fund, which is an enterprise fund, which means that it's not paid by an allocation out of the general fund. It's paid for by the golf course they use it. It was mentioned at one of our committee meetings that fund was hurting at first it looked very bad. And now actually the amount of golfers has increased, and it looks like the fund, it is very close to matching what it was last year. Is that?
Yes, that's correct. And thank you for bringing that up. Our rounds and our income and revenue may exceed last year's. So we have definitely, everybody's playing golf evidently.
And that's even with the golf courses closing during COVID itself.
Pardon me?
And that was with the golf courses being closed during the worst part of COVID.
That's correct.
Thank you, Nancy.
Mm-hmm.
Nancy, Mike Hoffman, on the RTD Flex Pass.
Yes.
Now, that is that in part because, well, we probably have a lot of employees working at home that don't need it, but I just want to say, as someone who spars pretty frequently with RTD over their desire to cut back routes in Aurora, whatever we can do to plus up our numbers would be helpful.
Right. And actually our numbers were previous years, and we still only had around 10 to 20 employees that took advantage of this.
Oh, boy. Okay, thanks.
So not very cost effective.
Nope.
So our next department, unless there are more questions.
I just had one quick one about the question regarding golf. Is that partially related to more local tourism, people traveling out of the local area less during COVID?
That may make sense. I don't know whether we've figured out exactly why our statistics are so great, but I think we have a lot of people that really want to do outdoor activities. They want to stay close to home, and this is one that fits that bill.
Good. Further questions? Thanks, Nancy. Okay.
Sure. On library and cultural, they cut their budget by about $437,000 to help balance the budget. They eliminated 2 vacant library assistants. And again, that's ongoing, but they are vacant. And then reduced the materials acquisition by about $306,000. There's still about $700,000 left for, and that's all materials, whether it's books, hardcover, or videos, etc. So that is library and cultural. Any questions on that?
Mayor?
Councilmember Coombs.
Just so it looks like there's starting with 437,000, and that cut just continues to go up through 2025 in the projections of what's going to be cut from the library and cultural services. So I guess, knowing that they took an 8% cut, which is one of the largest cuts that we've seen of any department, and now it's not just going to be a COVID cut, but an ongoing permanent cut. How is that going to impact the quality of service to our community from our libraries?
This is Greg Hayes. I can speak to that. The reason that you're seeing increases in places where you've got FTE is that we're assuming that those FTE in 2022 would have been 2 or 3% more. In 2023, they would have been 3 or 3% more. So when you have an ongoing kind of a person, you have to assume that the growth of that cut continues on.
Okay, but we're going to continue the cuts, though. We're going to our libraries
they're ongoing again.
And as you'll, sorry, I just wanted to say that most of the cuts that you're going to see are ongoing. They aren't one time only for next year.
Yeah, and again, the question is more just like, how does that impact the quality of the service that we're then providing, and why such a large percentage cut from one of our lowest funded departments?
I think that's a fair question. They have traditionally been underfunded in collections and whatever we try to get back. So we'll just have to keep trying that when the situation improves here.
Okay. Further questions? Seeing none, thanks, Nancy. Let's go to the next section.
We're on to Parks, Recreation, and Open Space. And again, this is the general fund portion of this department. This department has a variety of funds, so this is only general fund. $790,000 to help balance the budget, and these are all ongoing. They eliminated, and this is the 0.75 of a general fund position, but it adds up to 2 positions, landscape architect and landscape designer, because it's going to hit other funds, which I'll talk about later, but it's a total of 2 vacant positions. We're suggesting to eliminate buskers, brews, and barbecue. That was an event that didn't generate as many people as we'd hoped in the past, so we've eliminated that from our special event list. And we, as you have seen, we haven't done special events this year. Median renovations, we're reducing that line item by about $641,000. And again, that's across the board, as you'll notice. However, we have about $3 million in this year's funding and carry forward funding that we are designing and actually out to bid with all the medians that council approved this year. So hopefully we'll get good bids and be back and complete all those projects probably next spring. We also reduced professional services and open space and natural resources, about $53,000. So questions on Parks and Rec, and I'm going to later come to other funds within Parks and Rec.
Questions?
Any questions?
Nope. Seeing none.
Okay. On to Public Works. They eliminated $1.4 million to help balance. This is all ongoing. And what we did, and you'll see this in the first dot point there, we allocated FTE to the projects that they were completing. So two of those were the Aurora Municipal Center refinancing and major building repairs. So the time they spent on those projects get charged against those projects. We eliminated 4 vacant engineering positions and 5 vacant operating positions also throughout the department, and then reduced their supplies and services by about $130,000. So these are significant reductions for this department. Any questions on that?
Mayor Dave Gruber.
Councilmember Gruber.
Nancy, in Public Works, I understand that the road maintenance itself is, and fixing potholes and repaving roads is under the capital fund and not the general fund.
That's correct.
I'd like an explanation as to losing these people in the general fund. Does that further complicate the deficiencies that we have in the capital fund as far as repairing roads and repaving neighborhood roads?
We might come back and answer that, but we have about $125 million in the capital fund for capital repairs. We also complete some of these projects ourselves with ours, but we also bid out a lot. And I'm wondering if Cindy's on the phone, if she has anything to add to that. Hi, Cindy.
Hi, sorry, first I had to unmute. Now I will unvideo. Thank you. Cindy Collett, Public Works Director. Yes, good observation, Councilmember Gruber. This will have impacts to our ability to get some of those projects done because there are reductions in our operations FTEs as well. So it will be somewhat.
Thank you for that. I'm sorry to hear the answer, but thank you for
Cindy, Cindy, how much is that related to road maintenance?
Within the operations reductions, I believe 3 of those are maintenance and operations technicians within our streets specifically. Right now, though, we're also down in that division just from the sheer number of bodies needed to support a snowstorm that we, an average snowstorm that we look at each year.
Okay. Further question? Other questions? Okay, seeing none. Thank you.
I'm going to move on. As I mentioned previously, there are a number of other funds within the operating group. Most of these are in PROS. The first one is open space. And as I said, there are 2 positions that are being eliminated. Open space has 0.5 of those 2 positions as a reduction. Parks Development Fund has 0.75, and then General Fund makes up the rest, and so that totals 2. Recreation Fund, I already talked about Buskers, Brews, and Barbecue. And we have left the rec budget primarily the same for next year. It is too early for us to really know what the trends are going to be and what the rec budget needs to look like. So we'd like a little more time to figure all that out and what the needs are going to be for next year. I'm sure we'll be talking about that more in the future. And the same on the cultural. We just need a little more time under our belt to see what the trends are going to look like.
Questions?
Questions?
Seeing none.
Then we also have capital, primarily Public Works, as Councilmember Gruber asked about the maintenance, which is primarily in this budget. 2.1 million is reduced in 2020, and then it's pushed though back into the 2021 to 2025. So what we've really done is defer a lot of the capital towards later in our 5-year plan. Majority of the CPF is in street maintenance, and that's reconstruction and improvements, and that's 125 million in the 5-year plan. So that's where most of the capital is in Public Works. In PROS.
Mayor, before we leave that, may I ask?
Councilmember Gruber.
Nancy, going back to the capital improvements on the roads, I just wanted to point out that since the recession in 2008, we've been underfunding that to the tune of about $20 to $25 million a year. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then as a result of that, many of our residents, many of the Aurora residents wonder why our roads are beginning to have the problems that they are. In many cases, the roads are coming to the 20, 25 year age point, which is where they need significant work. And with that deficit year after year of $20 to $25 million, the city simply doesn't have enough money to repave or to fix many of the roads that we're having problems with. So my point is, and again, this isn't a blame on anybody. It's a simple fact that people need to understand that when you continually underfund something for many years, the aggregate effect of that will be seen for many more years. So, at some point in time, we need to find a funding source to take care of our roads.
Fair point. And the longer you defer maintenance, the more expensive it becomes in the end because you have to reconstruct rather than just do normal treatments. So I think that's a very fair point.
Thank you, Nancy.
Our other capital, next slide, Parks, Recreation, and Open Space. That's kind of the same strategy, meaning significant amounts of deferral projects from 2021 to out years. What we've tried to do, though, is maintain our capital for, things like irrigation, park maintenance, playground repairs, and safety needs in that 5-year plan. We've already heard that we reduced the median renovation by half in 21 to 24. However, we did, and another point that was made earlier, we have new golf cart fleets at Aurora Hills and Meadow Hills. And it's already been mentioned, golf is kind of the really positive highlight story of all of our year, meaning rounds and revenues appear to be exceeding last year's. So this has been a great job by golf. We are also completing some trails southeast. That's mainly the XL Trail, Highline, and Tollgate. That is going to be in the future budget. $2.5 million in park and trail grants. Plains Conservation, we're doing a soft turf path, outdoor learning lab, some eating areas, and some shade structures, and also improving the parking. So that hopefully over time will become one of our signature places. Park Lane Pool and Splash Pad, that's major renovation. Canterbury Park is also renovation. Sand Creek Large Group Shelter. We continue to try to make progress on our master plan at Sand Creek. So any questions on that capital area? So I'll move on to water, and you heard from Janet Marlowe tonight from the Citizen Water Committee. We do have stable revenue collections, so we're not operating ads or cuts in that area. Water, sewer, and storm rates are not increasing in 2021. We have created, and you heard a little bit about this, a new class tier rate design. That's going to be in 2021 that we're proposing. And under normal circumstance, that should result in less than a 1% in additional revenues. And it's really going to stabilize rates for those using less water. 80%, I believe, will see not much change in their costs for water, but customers that use a larger amount will see an increase. So it's stabilization for the lower rates. The residential monthly bill will increase. For those that use 88,000, is going to increase 30 cents. So if you go to the next chart, this is one of our favorite charts. We're down at the bottom there, or near the bottom. The yellow is the 21 proposed, and the red is the 2020. And some of you may recall, we used to be in the kind of the upper quarter. Now we're in the bottom quarter, which is something we should all be really proud of. So we've worked hard to do that. Under capital for water, you also heard some of this under the Citizen Water Committee, our big projects, and many of you had an opportunity to actually see what the bed of Wild Horse Reservoir is going to look like. We went up there and looked at the site where hopefully the reservoir will be. That's an opportunity not many have. We have treatment facilities, both Wemlinger and Griswold. that we're trying to bring the facilities up to date and replace aging infrastructure. SEAM is a maintenance facility north of Quincy across from the reservoir where the operating and maintenance staff of water will go. Water rights acquisition, you heard a little bit about that, but we also have to continue to always be buying water rights. New T&D water mains, also have to keep doing that. Raw water rehab, which is mainly for Strontia, Rampart, and Quincy. We have to continue on that every year. Under wastewater, that's the other half of SEAM, is in this Wastewater Fund, new sewer line construction, and First Creek Interceptor. Those are the major projects under wastewater. Any questions? Lots of projects. So if not, I'm going to turn it over to Roberto, who's going to handle his departments.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I will be presenting the departments that I work with: communications, finance, housing, and community services. I do want to acknowledge before I do so that while I'm presenting the amendments in those departments, I want to acknowledge the hard work of the staff that they've done in meeting the challenge of some really difficult times during the COVID pandemic and trying to make some tough decisions around budget. And so while I'm presenting them, they have really done the hard work in sharpening their pencils and looking at their departments to try to find the savings to meet the budget in 2021. So with that, I will move into communications. We are reducing the budget in professional services and advertising by about $200,000. As we previously discussed, this is primarily in the Go Big Aurora marketing campaign. We do quite a bit of media buys for that campaign and marketing in terms of 5280 magazine or billboards on RTD. We will be reducing the overall cost for those advertising purchases and bringing a lot of that internal rather than using third-party market buyers to do that. So that'll save us about $198,000. In finance, we have a combination of things that we will be doing that will be about $1 million to help balance the 2021 budget. First, we will be adding FTE in terms of the tax audit function. That will be at a cost of about $271,000. Our historical experience has been that when we add tax audit function, we generate revenue as a result of compliance. We anticipate about $400,000 generated in revenue, so it'll be a net increase in revenue to be able to help balance the budget in 2021. We have been fairly lean in the tax audit function, so we feel comfortable by adding this audit function that we'll be able to get more compliance and as a result, additional revenue, but we will be adding 3 tax audit functions in 2021. The next 2 bullets are related to much of the work that Terry Velasquez's group has been doing to assist the Urban Renewal Authority in providing financial analysis for ever-increasing complex deals that are coming out of the urban renewal areas. For example, in Regatta Plaza, the Point, or the Hyatt Conference Center and Hotel, they require quite a bit of financial analysis, and some of the staff in finance have been doing that increasingly over the last few years. So we felt it appropriate to move some of the costs that are in the general fund in the finance department over to Urban Renewal Authority to better reflect what the staff is already doing and providing by way of financial analysis for the Urban Renewal Authority. That is about $115,000 for a FTE accountant and about a half FTE for the debt treasury division, which equates to about $43,000. We will be eliminating 1 vacant receptionist position, which will be the equivalent of $54,000. We have been moving more and more, especially now with the recovery plan, to have less and less public-facing functions in some of the departments that don't have as much contact with the public, so we did not feel this position was needed, and so we are eliminated. It's currently vacant. And as the mayor asked earlier, the marketplace facilitator ordinance was approved by council earlier this year. It will allow for the revenue collection, sales tax collection for third-party vendors who sell their products on Amazon, for example. We currently can collect directly from Amazon, but not from the third party. So that will generate about $700,000, and we think that is a conservative revenue estimate. Moving over to housing and
I just have a quick question about the so it looks like although the percentage of adjustment, that's 12.6%, was pretty high for finance, most of that is in generating additional revenue, not actually cutting over $1 million of position.
It's basically balancing it by generating revenue rather than by cutting. So yes, both with the marketplace and then the audit function. So yes, you are correct. If there are no other questions on those two departments, I'll move over to housing and community services. I will highlight a few here, and if you have specific questions, we can get in. There's a variety of cost-cutting measures that we're taking in 2021. In the emergency solutions grants, the allocation of personnel and administrative costs towards that federal funding source, we are moving about $115,000 for the next 2 years over into that federal funding source. As you are aware, we have been the recipient of an increasing amount of HUD funding as a result of the COVID to provide services and programs and grant funding to meet the need, especially in particular with the emergency solutions grants. Many of the programs and criteria for that program fit directly with what we're doing in our homelessness program. And so we felt it appropriate to use a portion of that federal funding for those costs instead of completely by the general fund. So we will be using about $115,000 of federal funding. That funding is stable for multiple years. We will probably have to kind of revisit that in future years, but we think at least for the next 2 years into 2023, we are comfortable moving those costs over to the federal funding where we feel it more appropriate. Animal services budget reductions. And it's related also, I wanted to, with the code enforcement officers, we have about currently 20 code enforcement officers and 12 animal protection officers that we're currently authorized to fill in the budget. What we're proposing is to eliminate the 20th code enforcement officer and eliminate the 12th animal protection officers. So we will recruit for 18 code enforcement officers and recruit for 10 animal protection officers. We'll keep the 19th code enforcement officer vacant until we have better budget times and we can fill it. And we'll keep the 11th animal protection officer vacant until we can have better budget times and be able to fill that position. So just wanted to let you know the overall strength that we have in those two areas and how we're reducing by one in each an FTE as an ongoing savings. That equates to about $108,000 in animal services and about $71,000 in a vacant code enforcement officer. That halftime FTE in animal services is also a reduction from one FTE that's vacant to a halftime vacant when we fill it. It is a frontline staff there that we feel like we can have that filled with a halftime position rather than a full-time position. So it equates to a 1.5 total FTE in animal services for budget reductions. We are looking at the neighborhood liaison position. Many of you obviously work with neighborhood liaisons. A lot of their work is very much related to, again, federal funding that we're receiving in the Community Development Fund and Community Development Division. We're proposing to allocate about 0.3 of that salary for one of those neighborhood liaisons out of federal funding rather than the general fund. So that is what that bullet indicates. And then finally, the last bullet was referenced by Greg at the beginning of the presentation. Many of you are aware of the pet adoption grant-funded program that we administer and have administered for several years in Westminster at a PetSmart out there. It is hugely successful, but the grant has come to an end. We have, with pet adoption fees and the grant, we are offsetting most of those costs, but we do need to transfer, since the grant is ending, we do need to transfer the cost of that program over to the general fund rather than to the gifts and grants fund. So that is what's reflected in that final bullet. The program will continue. By doing this, we will make it a priority in the general fund. We think it's hugely successful. We know it's hugely successful. The numbers have bore that out, and it really helps with our ability to find animals a home out of the animal shelter rather than the alternative, and placing them and having a success in doing so. So we certainly want to continue the program. So with that, sorry.
Yeah, Roberto, Mike Kaufman, on that, why the connection with Westminster?
This predates me, and if Nancy Sheffield's on the line, she may know. I can get that answer for you. I know that we did it with a PetSmart there, and I don't know quite the reason why we had that particular facility. If Nancy's on the line and has any insight on that, otherwise we can get you an answer.
Yeah, please do, because we have a PetSmart in Aurora, so it's kind of surprising.
I'm on the line. Can you hear me?
Sure.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, the PetSmart in Westminster is, my understanding is, it's the only PetSmart that has an actual shelter where we can leave animals overnight.
Okay.
And so that is the reason why we've partnered with that particular PetSmart. And like Roberto said, we've been very successful in transferring some dogs that haven't been adopted out of animal services over there.
Okay.
Mayor, can I ask a quick follow-up?
Councilmember Coombs?
Do we also transfer restricted breeds rather than keeping them in the Aurora Animal Shelter to that Westminster facility?
Yes, we do.
We have been doing that. Obviously, we test any of our dogs before they go to that shelter for behavioral, and then we do transfer restricted breeds and other dogs there just to give them a greater opportunity to be adopted.
Okay. Further questions? Seeing none.
Once again. Roberto, would this be a good time to ask questions about Community Development Fund questions related to transferring some of those FTs, or is there a better time to ask those?
Right now's the time.
Okay, great. So you had mentioned that fund is going to be stable. I'm wondering if we would anticipate any growth based on the census to those funds that we receive going into the Community Development Fund.
That is certainly the hope. That is leading to why I said there's some stability there. We do anticipate growth in Aurora, growth in our population. Those are all formula based. They simply are on population, and we would anticipate us receiving more CDBG, home, ESG. All the federal HUD programs are on a very clear formula base, and hopefully, knock on wood, with the census, we will have increased numbers, and a result, we feel very confident that number should stay stable, and hopefully we think increase with the amount of population size increases that we anticipate for the city.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Mayor?
Councilmember Lawson.
Roberto, I do have a question. I'm interested in the public service money that you have. It's allocated in the summary for $100,000. And then when I look at the breakdown, you spent 2019 $49,500, and this is saying it goes to nonprofits for homeless persons, service for seniors, fair housing activities, employment services, and recreation services. I'd like a little bit more information on that. What nonprofits are you guys giving this money to, and where is it? This is the first time I actually really have seen this.
So where in the budget book are you looking? I don't have it.
Yeah, well, it's this, I'm looking at F68 has how much it is. F81 has the breakdown of
And
what
this is-
public services.
And this is in what? In Housing Community Services?
Yes, it is. Housing and Community Services.
We can take a look at that and provide you a breakdown. I off the top of my head, I don't have those numbers in front of me, but I can look at the nonprofits that we are funding
I
with
would
that
like
money.
to have that information because I'm interested in where that money is being allocated to, especially when you're talking about fair housing activities. I haven't really seen this. So could I get a breakdown of what those nonprofits are? What this is about, actually?
Absolutely. I'll do that, Councilmember Lawson.
Thank you.
Mayor.
Councilmember Murillo.
Actually, I wanted to just follow up on the comment that Councilmember Coombs made. Do we know when we would realize the change in federal funds after the census, like a year, 2 years?
I can get you the exact dates. I know there's some reconciling that's done in 2020, but my understanding is that in 2021 we would have the new allocations, but I can get you the exact dates of when they would be effective.
Yeah, I would be interested in just knowing if there was a deviation outside of, because it's an annual allocation. So I just wanted to make sure that we would get it in the next fiscal year. But yeah, if you could follow up, that'd be great.
Okay.
I will. And I think I have another slide. Do I have another slide, Greg? I'm not sure if I do. Yeah.
Yes.
And this goes to specifically to your point, Crystal, Councilmember Murillo, the housing and community services. So we true up every year because the appropriation schedule in Congress, we anticipate how much we're going to get because of the formula, but it always varies. And when the actual appropriation occurs, we have to adjust those numbers. We'll probably have to do that again, both for the census and when they appropriate in next year for the fiscal year, which is different than our calendar fiscal year. The city, they have a different fiscal year. But in this first slide in the Community Development Fund, it just reflects that variance. So we are basically for the home and CDBG, we are providing the actual numbers, which are a little different by about 86,000 and 113,000 in the positive. So we got more money there once we got their appropriation for home and for CDBG. So that's what's reflected there. And then gifts and grants, we talked about the transfer of the everyday adoption center, that what that will be in terms of the hit on the general fund. It is not a net neutral. We do have to supplement by about $34,000, even after we get the adoption fees and the grant money runs completely out. We still will probably be on the hook for about $34,000. And then we discussed the allocation of personal cost to ESG of about $115,000, and we'll need to reflect that in the fund amendments for 2021. So with that, I think I am done, and I will stand for any remaining questions.
Are there any questions? Oh, I'm sorry, could you go over Roberto Emergency Solutions Grant? What that's for?
Yeah, we can provide you the program criteria because it's been evolving a little bit because of the COVID. They have changed some of the program criteria and goals, but a lot of it is for emergency sheltering, the rental assistance program.
Okay.
It's like those emergency needs where you have, and we're going to use it for emergency shelter. We're doing that now for rental assistance. I can give you the specific program criteria for those functions.
That's fine. Further questions? Seeing none, thanks, Roberto.
Thank you.
All right. I'm going to bring it to the end. We've only got about 50 more slides, so we're getting close. No, we've just got a few more. You are going to see some budget reductions in non-departmental, about $2.9 million with the balancing of that. A lot of that is one time, and some of that is ongoing. One of the things we're going to do, eliminating the court system assessments set aside last year. We paid $75,000 for an assessment of the court area, and then we set aside $300,000. We're not doing the $75,000 project, and we're eliminating the $100,000 ongoing. The next one, that's actually a piece of good news from the refi of the AMC. Is that one of the things it did is it built a pot of money of $9 million for projects associated on the AMC campus. And one of the things that we're going to do to balance is that we're going to take some existing projects that used to be in the capital projects fund, funded by this $9 million pot, and then decrease the transfer to the CDF by $2 million. Thus, the general fund gets the benefit of that. There's about $600,000 of just various non-departmental cuts. The majority of those are associated with contingencies, both personnel contingencies when we're helping out, setting aside a little bit of money for the smaller departments that when they have somebody retire or if they have somebody that changes their insurance, we've got money set aside for that, and a small amount of money set aside for the city manager to use as well. And on this money, if you look at the department pages are actually higher than that because it's technical, but the median renovation cut in pros actually is found in non-departmental because it's non-departmental only. Any questions on non-departmental?
Sounds like
questions? Comments? Okay, please proceed.
All right. And city council is also taking some reductions as well. And in 2020, there is some travel related savings. Just like everybody else in the city, travel and training was reduced by 50% and probably even more in the end because I don't think a lot of people are able to travel. In 2021, there are 3 different cuts here. Cuts, $22,000 cut to council travel, a $15,000 cut to this council contingency, and then another $18,000 of just various operating supplies and miscellaneous events budget. And we can get through that. So any questions on city council?
Greg, I have a question.
Councilmember Resins.
Thank you. Our contingency, we rarely use it all. Is there any way it can be rolled over to 21, whatever's left?
The council contingency?
Yes.
Yeah, actually, the entire council contingency is being eliminated in the 2021 budget. And you're right, you hardly ever used all of it. It's $15,700. Typically, the majority of it was left on the table. But
Okay, so there's no way that whatever's left on the table can roll into 21?
We're cutting the entire $15,600. Okay. There's nothing to roll forward.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Further questions? Thanks.
All right. Next thing, here's the marijuana tax revenue fund. You have to get on your reader glasses for this one. There's a couple things I want to point out. About 8 lines down, you'll see a line that says transfer to designated revenues fund for youth violence prevention and court surcharge programs. That's the 1% marijuana tax increase that you all approved, I think, this year. And it's going forward. I think there's some work that's currently happening on how to spend that money, but we're setting it aside over in the designated revenue fund. Decisions are made. And the other thing that I want to point out with the marijuana fund is if you look at the unassigned revenue is actually increasing over time. This bottom line. A couple reasons for that. Number one is we've been on the tax revenue fund because we were so new in it and hadn't had that money before, so we wanted to really be conservative on this. But because we're now 5-6 years in and we continually beat our projections, we've now kind of built in a growth factor. We used to hold it flat into the future, not knowing what the future was going to hold. Now we have a little bit of a growth factor in there. But what I want to do is I want to stress with you, and you'll see that with a lot of the things on here, it's really time to be conservative on spending money. We're just not certain. We're so uncertain about how the future is going to hold that we would request if it pleases the council to maybe not spend this money in 2021, and we can look back at it again in 2022. There's a couple things and actually Nancy brought them up that I think is awfully important to me. I still don't know what's going on with the future of the rec fund or the future of the cultural services fund. And the effect of COVID on those two. This is actually a card. This fund, the unassigned revenue, is a card that we could play if need be in either of those funds, if the need arises. But I did want to point out that there is funds available on there, and over time, by 2025, it gets to be a pretty big goal. So any questions on the marijuana fund? All right, hearing none. Budget calendar, you've got your budget books on August 31st. Today you've heard from boards and commissions, you've seen the presentation. On about 11 days from now on a Saturday, we're all gonna get together, hopefully on WebEx again, but do the fall budget workshop. And then October 7th and October 21st, you're gonna see the introduction ordinance and then the final reading to adopt the 2021 budget. I wanted to point out one thing that you see in there, and well, because 2020 is definitely a different year than anything we've dealt with before. There is actually a special supper? I'm getting hungry. A special summer supplemental that's built into the numbers. And if you go look on page I-37, we, at the time, if you think about back when we were, when COVID first came out, we were just building the 2020 spring supplemental. And because things were so up in the air, we said we were only going to do the supplementals that we had to do. We weren't going to do any 2020 supplementals in that process. There are some absolute technical items, net zero reorganizations is as an example, that we are assuming are okay in this budget. And a great example of that, I kind of brought it up before. Public Works has actually been a part of reorganization. Public Works has taken over the fleet function out of general management. And there's a couple other items in there. There's some new or existing grant funding, kind of a net zero from revenue to expenditure, existing grant funding in there as well. And what's going to happen, all of them are technical in nature. All of them are kind of no decision things. But I do want you to look at it, and when you approve the budget, you'll also be approving this special summer supplemental. And with that, do you have any additional questions?
Mayor Dave Gruber. Mayor.
Councilmember Gruber, sorry.
Greg, I want to thank you and Terry and the entire crew who put this budget together. I know how much work it is. We've discussed much of it at our management and finance meetings. You know, we're talking nearly $1 billion here, a substantial amount of money that we're responsible for. And the fact that you guys can account for every penny is, you should be commended for that. So I wanted to thank you and the entire staff who put this together.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions or comments? Greg, thanks so much for all your hard work. Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody. And we'll, on the CABC, if you have any questions, we'll develop a system to forward them over there, and we'll make sure next time they have adequate time. My mistake. Thanks, everybody.